know if you want me to jump in, Maureen?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so Sam and anyone watching, tonight, our only item is the fraud assessment that Marcum, or sorry, what is it, CBIZ, put together for us. So they're gonna walk us through their findings, and I think there's some recommendations, and we'll go through that. Do you wanna take it away?
Sure, great, thanks very much. And what we want to do, we'll start with introductions of Mike and myself, then we'll do an overview of the project and our approach. We'll get into what we saw as findings and recommendations, then we'll come up with next steps, if that's okay with everybody.
That'd be great.
Just for introductions, my name is Jim Lowe. I'm a managing director with CBIZ, previously a partner with Marcum. We were acquired November 1st, that's why our name changed. I've got 31 years of experience in internal audit and audit experiences helping with fraud risk assessments and these types of assessments, and my colleague Mike.
Mike McShay, I'm a director working with Jim in our internal audit practice. Similar in a lot of ways, over 30 years of industry experience, primarily doing internal audits and internal controls reviews for various companies, cities, towns, etc.
Sam, can you hear okay with,
Yeah,
you're okay? Okay,
if I'm sitting in the middle.
okay, I didn't know if you wanted to come up a little closer, because I know it's hard to hear.
I think it probably is just him, right?
Okay, I
So
get,
if need be, I know more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, just to give a little background on the project overview and approach. Based on the external auditor's recommendation, a fraud risk assessment was conducted, and we were engaged to do that engagement. The purpose of a fraud risk assessment is to identify, analyze, and address potential areas for fraud, both operational and financial, within the municipality. It includes understanding the overall municipality, identifying potential fraud risks, assess the likelihood and impact of those risks, evaluating any existing safeguards or providing recommendations for safeguards, and recommending strategies for addressing overall risk. So as part of it specific to Barre, we conducted 14 interviews across 13 departments with areas of focus on risk management awareness, history of fraud and any compliance issues, risk to reputation in operations, leadership oversight and risk-taking, catastrophic event identification, concerns of frontline workers, and impact on departments and towns. So that really sums up the approach through the interview process as well as any documents that we collected. What we thought would be good was to start with what the definition of fraud is, just to get a baseline of that. It is defined as a knowing misrepresentation of the truth or concealment of a material fact to induce another to act to his or her detriment. Really, there's a fraud triangle that really describes that definition, and there's three components: perceived pressure and motive, perceived opportunity, and rationalization. The first one, motive and rationalization, are usually ascribed to the person or entity that wants to commit the fraud. Perceived opportunity is what a fraud risk assessment can mitigate through identifying prevention and detection and what can come. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike to start with some of the top recurring risks, and what we're going to do is link those risks to the findings that we had as part of our fraud risk assessment.
so right now you're giving us an overview of what is a fraud.
Correct.
What are the, okay,
Correct. And then we're going to go
specifically through our organization.
We wanted to tee it up high level and bring it back down to
Okay.
what we found in the recommendations, and then
Okay.
we'll come back with what we think next steps could be.
Okay,
Yeah, just so everyone, I know you're looking at documents, we're working off a summary deck, which might be a little bit different from the draft report that you have. So if you're looking to anything that we have and it doesn't look like what you have in front of you, that's the reason. So we've taken some of the extracts out instead of reading all of the words verbatim back to everyone. So what Jim is mentioning is...
would you provide us with copies of that?
Yes.
Okay,
What Jim was talking about was just a listing of some of the typical types of areas of fraud that municipalities experience and could be exposed to. So what I'm listing here are not to say that these are specific things yet. So these aren't anything that we saw or that we're saying is definitely an issue or an area of concern, but these are the top areas that a lot of municipalities are exposed to. So there are 6 that I'm going to walk through. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about some of our direct observations, and what we've done is made a connection between our direct observations and these 6. So, the basic categories, and I'll explain each a little bit if that's helpful. Misuse of town assets, conflicts of interest, areas of, bribery, which could include kickbacks, overstating or understating either assets or liabilities the town has, fraud around pay in the payroll process, and then computer and internet fraud, or access, basically, the ability to access information, data, funds, and other means that can be utilized through your technology that the town has. So the misuse of town assets is a little bit broad, but it can be anything. When we talk about misuse, we're not talking about pens and paper and things in general course of business. It's misappropriating, taking, it could be theft, it could be utilizing machinery, tools, technology for personal gain, utilizing information to do a second job or something else on the side. Conflicts of interest, just what it sounds like, basically, if we're doing things where we could have an advantage or gain some sort of an advantage because we're hiring our own company to do work for the town, and it's not permissible in situations. Bribery and kickbacks, of course, I think everyone's pretty familiar with what we're talking about in that category. Overstating or understating, this is generally intended to mean intentionally misrepresenting, trying to hide a mistake, trying to hide a misappropriation of funds by inflating or deflating certain accounts and basically moving monies back and forth each month period as an evaluation is done to continually try to cover up on something that's been taken or misused. Payroll fraud could include fictitious hours, hours reported as work that aren't worked at all. It could include individuals added to the payroll that don't exist. Those types of situations are a little bit more rare, but certainly something like that could happen. And then the internet and computer fraud, I mentioned, the ability to get in, utilize the tools of technology to manipulate funds or other scenarios to someone's advantage. All right? Now, again, what we're doing is trying to boil some of this up, and what we didn't do was, just to make sure everyone was clear, we didn't go in and do any specific drill-down testing to say Mike or Jim did something. There was a definite problem. We followed up to see, what happened, what could have happened. This was all driven by the interviews that were conducted and some light review of procedural information, organizational charts, anything that was available to give us an understanding of the lay of the land. So this is feedback directed from that, which, as Jim mentioned, would lead to some potential next steps if there were areas of concern that we noted to say we should probably do or recommend that the town do a little bit more to find out if there is actually something wrong because there was enough potential for fraudulent activity to occur. Okay? So some of the basic observations that we had, we're going to walk through each, and then I'll just say if there are questions, please let us know. Okay? So lack of comprehensive policies and procedures. Overall, we would say anytime you're in a situation like that where you don't really have your job responsibilities, your duties kind of laid out, who does it, when do they do it, who are their backups, all of that type of procedural process, it can lend itself to A, confusion, and then B, folks doing things just the way they know how to do it or the way somebody else showed them how to do it, or doing it the wrong way intentionally. So if you have documentation in place, and a lot of these recommendations is tied directly into the statement that I'm making, that there would be a recommendation for some procedural steps to be drawn up and be sure that everyone understands what those are. Decentralization. There's a fair amount of decentralization within the town, so there isn't a lot of centralized control to certain areas and operations. When you have that, again, and this can include controls over things, and we do have some information here around fixed assets, for instance. There isn't a centralized control to say, does the town know every bit of technology, computer, iPad, whatever it is, vehicle that we have, where they are, and will be accounted for them all. So when we talk about that, it's pushed out to different people, different departments, And there isn't an easy, convenient, and centralized way to say, we know what we have, we know where it is, we know if we need a new one, we know
So
if
we
we've given
would
up.
be in violation of GASB.
There's potentials for any of
Okay.
that. Employee training is another area we noted, specifically around ethical and appropriate usage of town assets. So policies and procedures are great. Explaining them, of course, ties into that. That's the training aspect of people know why they're doing things, why they can't do certain things, why they shouldn't do certain things. A lot of this is, it sounds very simplistic, but in any environment, and we've seen it over and over again, if folks don't know why they're doing their job necessarily and haven't been properly trained on it, or cross-trained to fill in for somebody else, again, you could have things going wrong unintentionally. But you also then have the ability for folks to say, well, nobody else knows what the right way to do this, and I found a way to do something wrong, and if nobody's going to notice, maybe I'll do it. So training, again, factors into not only people understanding how to do their job, but other folks understanding what could be going wrong in the job if somebody's doing it.
And not necessarily with malevolent intent.
Correct. All of these observations could lean one way or another. It could be something that's happening, definitely, or it could be there's just an opportunity,
Mhm.
or there's nothing.
Right,
And it gets back to the fraud triangle, like we talked
Right.
about, that opportunity.
right.
And with the training too, especially on the ethical part, having the employees certify or indicate they took the training and they understood the training, which puts accountability back on them in the event something that does happen. You can point to us from the town that you took the training, so you should have known better.
Mhm, mhm. Including the state training on, in the
Correct.
ethics, okay.
Some of these other areas kind of tie together. So there's approval, whether it's approval of purchases, approval of direct expenses or indirect expenses, approval of timesheets. There could be better controls in place over all these types of approvals and reviews. So again, Jim's my boss. You know, if I'm saying I'm working and I'm on Facebook at the beach, you know, and he notices that, he'd be like, well, Mike's supposedly at work, but he's on vacation at the same time. There's a disconnect here. So it's, what's the approval process? Do folks, and it ties into the others as well, do I know what I'm supposed to be doing, or am I just approving things because that's the process, the way it's always been? Do I know that folks are really doing their 40 hours?
Mhm.
Do I know that Mike's recording his vacation and his time off, or is he putting in for, you know, for time worked and he's not really here? And then,
Excuse me, in this
Yes.
instance, Jim's no fun to work for.
right, I mean, potentially, it depends on the day. Depends on the
I've
day
never
of the
been
week.
told that.
The last thing on this page is segregation of duties, and again, this is where we're able to better align who can approve things along the lines of purchases, who then is responsible for reconciling those purchases or actually making the payments and then utilizing whatever the equipment or assets that are being purchased. So I'm using purchasing as an area of focus, but segregation of duties applies to all areas of the town's operation. If the wrong people are doing things, they could be doing it the right way, but it doesn't mean there isn't, again, that opportunity for something to go wrong. If I'm having too many pieces of the pie, as the expression goes, I'm able to purchase, reconcile, and then utilize the assets. There's potential for something to go missing.
This is probably the area where we would see actual fraud occur the most: segregations of duties, cash receipts, cash disbursements, but also vendor setup. A lot of times, whether it's corporates or municipalities, they don't have the appropriate procedures and segregation of duties of setting up a new vendor, and payment would go out. If that was an approved vendor of the town and it was set up fake, and you don't know, you don't have segregation of duties around procurement and accounts payable, that right there is a red flag that there's fraud. And time again, you hear it probably in the papers, people have been let go from a finance position because they paid a vendor that was not approved, they just sent the check out the door, and they're trying to go to the bank to get the money back. It happens all the time.
And it's not really a vendor at all? But just
Not a
some-
vendor at all, or it's, it could be a vendor overseas, it could be, a lot of times what would happen is vendors, you get their W-9s, you prove
Right.
that they are, and it's on a list, the
Right.
vendor list. So anytime you cut a check, go to the list and make sure you have their updated W-9, you have it all
Right.
there, you actually call back. You have callback procedures to
Yeah.
make sure you're actually a real person. behind that number.
Mhm.
A lot of times people don't do that because there's a short staff of people
Mhm.
and they're trying to get their job done. Nothing nefarious half the time. It's just,
Yeah.
it's down to a segregation of duties issue.
Okay.
Yeah, and that applies, I mean, obviously, that, the scenario of the Jim is painting could be external party trying to perpetrate something. A lot of towns you've seen in Massachusetts have been subject to wire fraud.
Yeah.
So that's an important aspect to all of the things that we're raising here. It isn't just the concern around the employees and the people within the town itself doing things nefarious. It's outside parties that are able to
Mhm.
perpetrate theft and fraud against a municipality. There's been several over the last 10 to 12 months that have lost large amounts of funds through wire transfer fraud.
Mhm.
So understanding why we're doing things, as Jim mentioned, understanding what to do, how to do it, having the proper training, helps safeguard the town as well against external threats, not just internal threats. There were a couple of other things we noted. So there was a, you know, we're noting it as a bit of an irregular town's governance structure where not all of the town departments are centrally controlled or reporting in to the town manager or town administration. So we don't often see that. Sometimes we will see a delineation between school departments and town administration. Usually most of the operational departments then within the town are all reporting and have a reporting structure. They don't operate independently. I think here we're talking about the Public Works Department operates at a little bit different structure. So that's an irregularity that we are noting in the report.
And just on that point
yeah.
too, yes, it's a municipality and a town, but a lot of times what we try to apply is what we see in the corporate world with corporate governance, just good corporate governance. It's like you have a company, but a division doesn't report up and they're allowed to do whatever, but they're asking for funding from the corporation. You just never would see a situation like that, and taking the good of a good corporate governance program in the corporate US and applying it to municipality without having overdoing it is sometimes a good practice to apply to these types of scenarios.
And that ties really into the next point. We talk about governance overall, an anti-fraud program, a code of conduct, whistleblower process, ethical training. These are all things that we're noting that the town doesn't have that would fall under that umbrella of good corporate governance to be able to set up the umbrella in place. Underneath that is the training, underneath that are the policies and procedures. But if there isn't a mechanism that's consistent to say, if somebody sees something, what do they do? If I see something, do I go to the town manager? Do I go to the police? Do I go to my department head? If there isn't a defined process, is there a legal counsel? Maybe somebody's going there instead. So just having that all mapped out, and it sounds like a lot, but it isn't. It's really, a centralized document. It doesn't have to be complex, but it lays out some foundational elements to say, this is what we do. If there's a problem, this is who we contact. If there's a code of conduct, we should all be attesting that we're going to do our job honestly and fairly and follow the laws as established from the state, and what the town's established is a good ethical environment. So don't think you're into a situation where you're developing a manual this big to try and cover off on everything the town's doing. It's really the most simplistic levels. What are the key things you need to communicate to people and have them read, understand, potentially attest to without
Or
getting
definitely
complex.
attest to. I would definitely have them attest back to you that they read it, they understood it, and they're going to apply it in their job. Because at the end of the day, if something happens, you have that to go back to them.
I would suspect you have exemplars of such a document.
Yes, we do.
Okay. And you would share them with us.
We can share.
And then the last high-level point we wanted to make is there isn't a dedicated HR payroll function, a centralized or reporting individual in that position. So if there are problems with payroll, issues with employees, there isn't a clear delineated individual who can help facilitate that, can review, look for errors, mistakes, look at timesheets, payroll calculations, and all of that. Comments like that certainly would lend itself to the assumption that, do we need to hire somebody? Yes, that's where we're angling towards. This should be considered as a position within the town. Of course, you know, every town has its own bandwidth issues, so we're just bringing these things to light and making the suggestions as best we can. You know, there are ways to resolve that without direct hiring, of course, but that would then entail the training for somebody else to understand exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, what they're looking for. So those were the high-level observations that we had, and again, as a result of inquiry, discussion, and some inspection of documentation. There are some suggestions and recommendations for next steps that Jim was going to talk through a little bit, but if there's questions on any of that, like I said, I know this is varying a little bit from here. There's a lot of detail in the report itself. There's a lot more layers to it for you to read through, but as I said, I didn't think it was of extreme value to hammer through all of that. It'd be a lot of words to kind of dump on you verbally.
Of course, I don't disagree with anything that you have, kind of glossed over at this point and so forth. I think that you have some truisms in there. I recognize the community you're talking. You've audited for sure, and the real I think struggle for us is not making this happen. We don't have the personnel to make it happen, and we don't have the personnel to manage it. And I'm not saying that that is an excuse, but that is something that we need to grapple with as a community to say, how do you want us to run this business? And right now, we run this business by the seat of our pants. We're very, very understaffed, and many of our people are very overworked. They're asked to do a little of this and a little of that and so forth, and sometimes some of the things that you've recognized as possible fraud areas are indeed just that. Could they be taken advantage of? Yes. And do we have the personnel to even know what happened? Probably not. I'm not saying it has happened,
Right.
but I'm saying our staffing pattern does not enable us to adjust and do all the things that we need to do. And so we'll be obviously seeking some recommendations from you to say, where are the exemplars? Where are the places that we could go that are small with no money, and how do they do it? And how do they become successful? I mean, we have had such turnover in our staffing patterns due to the fact that we have been underpaying people for a long time, and those days are gone, or the people are gone. And so we've made some adjustments in our work to negotiate different contracts with our police department, with our fire department, with our DPW department, and so on. So that has helped a little. We've had some issues relative to a lot of people leaving our DPW area for a variety of reasons that probably aren't worthy of discussion at this point. But so having all of that stuff happening around us, what would be your recommendation for grappling with best next steps?
I think the best next steps that are most cost effective is really to get policies and procedures around how to do the right thing and having them sign off on it. The policies can be real easy to put together, and having people sign off on these, and if they're not, that's a red flag right there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a first step in identifying individuals within the municipality, within the departments that are, for lack of a better term, aren't going to play ball.
And I certainly don't want the community to think in any way I believe that there are those people working for us. I mean that but it's a little freewheeling,
Yeah.
okay, and having the opportunity to, if you can share with us exemplars of policies and procedures typical in small municipalities, would be very helpful to us. And that would be if that's the best next step. That's probably one that we could kind of manage with
Just
our.
to give them a cost management effective.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I really caution, this is just my personal opinion about governmental structure. It is very lacking in having the ability to do the job. It really is. And I don't mean forget the DPW commission. That's another issue of concern. I understand that. But I'm saying that when you have a leadership team that rotates through the organization, sort of maybe every 3 years, maybe not, maybe they don't even stay the 3 years, and they have a tremendous amount of responsibility and almost no authority. As the chairman of the select board, I sit here and say, I want to be in charge. I want to really be in charge, because that would be so different. Having been the superintendent of schools, I had 15 school committee members, but I, by state statute, had vested in me personally as the superintendent, this authority. John can't do anything on his own, Maureen can't do anything on his own, Mark can't do anything on his own, and so it's been a huge frustration for me to sort of make things happen in a community that's really managed at town meeting in some ways. And so, I don't know, can you help us with the policies and procedures that would help us put together a more specific and rigorous structure that would allow the Board of Selectmen to do a better job, or have the capacity, or have the policies in place to do a better job?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would start with a code of conduct first.
Okay?
I think that would be most important,
Right.
because that's the same irrespective of what department you're
Okay.
employed by, and that's something that you write once and can be rolled out across all your departments.
It would be part of every new hire and
New
as well as
hire,
existing hires. I mean, it, as Jim said, it puts people on account, basically. So if something happens, they knew what was expected, they knew what not to do, basically. Any of these action items that are in here are difficult to do if you don't have the resources, potentially the funds to do it and manage it. The good news is, when you talk about municipalities and the issues, the good news and bad news, if something happens, you're gonna know, pretty much. It's gonna be, if it's a significant event, reacting to, how you're able to react to it is as important as knowing that it happened. So, that's why some of these other things we talked about, Jim mentioned the code of conduct, having some sort of a process in place to be able to escalate and report potential issues before they happen.
Whistleblowing hotline,
Yeah.
whistleblowing policy.
That's important as well, because that gives folks an avenue and an understanding of what they can do if they have a concern in advance of something potentially
It could
happening.
be anonymous, so that way
Yeah.
people aren't put, because you don't want, people will not use it, and that becomes something to prevent fraud.
Right.
Right. I mean, a lot of the other things, this, you're not making televisions that are walking out the back door, so a lot of the physical assets, if I have a computer and I take it, now I don't have a computer to do my job, right? So if I'm off selling my technology, it's not benefiting me other than short-term financially, but I can't, then how do I work? So, and buildings aren't gonna disappear, so there's a limit to what can happen when we talk about fraud, but it doesn't make it any better when it
Does happen.
happens, right? Like I said, a lot of the fraud we're seeing is either small case situations where somebody is taking advantage of a loophole or a weakness that they've identified for personal gain, but the majority are external parties coming in, tricking people into sending money out the door. These towns that were affected, I think, had larger contracts. Probably it was a little bit easier to get $300,000-$400,000 out
Yeah,
the door.
that would be
I think
very
if you
hard
got
to do here.
a bill for $300,000, someone might ask, but what's this?
Yeah.
So again, you have to put it into perspective when we're talking about the impact to a particular size town or community. But if it's $40,000, that's gonna hurt. If it's $20,000, that's gonna hurt. So all of these other things help prevent that from happening. It teaches people,
To determine.
right, what are they looking for? So if I get a bill, I know to look to see, I already have bill number 10 from this company. Is this a trick? Or am I getting an email telling me to do something? How to look for tricks in emails and phishing. So there's a lot of things that can be, I'm sure the state probably has some sound training on things along those lines, or if not, there's a lot of free information on phishing scams and
Yeah.
how to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
So I think those are just as important things to be concerned with as anything internally, but a lot of the information, I think we can get some of the basic underpinnings of what they should look like, and then the town decides what can we tackle in what order.
Now, so you can provide us with some exemplars.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of follow-up do you do with communities that you have gone through this process, and a year from now or 18 months from now, you return to the scene of the crime, and you say, okay, we're going to do 10 more interviews or whatever, and we're going to see if there has been, appropriate, implementation of some of your suggestions or recommendations, and things are better, things are changed. Because what I worry about is the lack of that follow-up if we don't consider that as a possible, next step after we do some of the things that you pointed out, because we won't do it.
Right.
I mean, I hate to say it, I'm just like the typical kid in class. Are you testing us on this?
Right.
And if I say no, well, guess what? Probably nobody's going to do a whole lot of studying for it. And so if we look at this, and if this is something that as a select board we engage with, think is worthwhile doing, it gives us sort of a roadmap to a better organization without, casting aspersions on any one individual and say, you're bad, you didn't do this, whatever. Because I think generally speaking, I can't say that at all times it never happened, but generally speaking, I think our workforce really works very hard, tries very hard to do the right thing, reports things that they think look amiss. But we did have a situation where there was money taken at the town clerk's office, or I should say the assessor's office, I guess, because people would pay in cash. And
Right, one for
and
you, one for me.
yeah, and so I'm going to say that, and that's a number of years ago now.
Where's the tax collector's office?
Yeah, okay, a number of years ago now, and not that has, it's not anything we're proud of, and it's sad that it happened, but, so we've seen bad things happen. Maybe not in our tenure, but we've had it happen in the community. So I look to say, as a board, maybe with your guidance, we say, these are our goals for the first 6 months, these are our goals for the year. And then maybe 18 months from now, you return and you walk us through, how do we do?
There's a couple different layers. Part of this was identifying the risks and what's lacking.
Mhm.
And then what's next is to build an implementation plan to correct
Okay.
that, to get it to what we call a residual risk level. You can never get rid of 100%
No.
of risk, but you can get it to a level that you can live with, and that would be your residual risk. And what that would entail is putting controls in place to ensure that you're reducing your risk down to that residual. What we would come in is, once it's been implemented, we would come in and test those
Okay.
controls to make sure that they're working. But there's a couple different layers. With another town, what they asked us to do, because they had concerns around the categories of expenses, where they've asked us to look at 100% of all of their expenses using data and analytics and compare it to the categories that are approved expenses to see what fell out. We ended up finding $500,000 in expenses that should not have been gone back to the municipality. They were paying spas, they were paying piano lessons, that sort of stuff.
Wow.
And using data analytics, it's an exercise once you normalize the data, because it comes from different areas, from payroll, accounts payable, invoices. You can look at it really quick and analyze it. They were just concerned, they had a hunch that it was something different, or they felt that there was something different, but we were able to identify that. Other areas, they've asked us to do a deeper dive into payroll as your biggest expense.
Yeah.
Can we look at the risk processing controls around payroll, just in light of what we found? And we do a deeper dive into it. We look at the controls, we test the design of the controls, because if they're not designed correctly, there's no point in testing the effectiveness
Good.
of the controls. So we would actually stop at different layers as opposed to going through everything as we go through it in that scenario. I think that risk assessing where your biggest areas are, where your biggest areas for potential fraud is probably the next step. And then what do you put in place to actually reduce that risk? And if you'd like us to come back at a point in time, we can assess it, or we can go any way it is. But really knowing the limited resources that you currently have, it's inventorying everything and then prioritizing what are the biggest risks. A lot of what we try to do is connect them. If I was to hit this risk downstream, it actually impacts these 3 other risks, so that's the one I want to try to manage
Got it.
first.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Or Mike?
Yeah, I mean, Jim's hitting on all the points. I mean, some of these segregation of duties, it's identifying who can do what, and if one person can do too much, as Jim said, then that could be, there's another risk someplace else, right?
Okay.
There's a risk of payroll information being wrong, or vendor payments being wrong, because one person can do too many things. So I think you can certainly, in reading the report, make some own self-assessment to say, this is where we're really concerned the most. We can opine as we have in the process, but only you really know how the town runs,
Mhm.
where the community's concerns are, where your concerns are. So you could certainly go through this, self-reflection to say, we see this, it echoes some of the things we already thought, and this is this is where we would start, and we can help, as you had asked. Certainly, we can help with any examples or
Mhm.
sample documentation and figure out a path forward together with you. But,
Mhm.
it does come down to you helping decide where the greatest emphasis needs to be placed
Mhm.
first.
And one of the things that we can give you that might help you with that risk assessment, the observations and recommendations links back to the top recurring risks.
Right.
We have that broken out by all 13 departments.
Oh, great.
So
That would be
way
great to see,
you can
yep.
pinpoint, because you don't want to put it over the ocean
If I don't have to. Right.
It's minimal risk at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Leave them alone.
Yeah, leave them alone. Yeah,
So we can provide that as well.
Okay.
To you, that would help to build your risk assessment and your map for implementation.
mhm. So, obviously, we haven't had a chance to read all of this yet. So, will we, as part of this process, once we sort of familiarize ourselves with it, and we sort of look at some of the documents you'll share with us, do we then sit down ourselves and make the implementation plan
Yes.
and pass that by you?
Basically, we're done at this point with this report. If you'd like us to, we're more than happy to take a look at it as a
Okay.
courtesy, as a follow-up. We're
Okay.
more than happy to do that.
Okay,
But I think that, yes, you as the select committee would come up with everything, come up with your prioritization, and figure out what's best and where, as Mike said, you guys know the departments better than anyone else, where you want to implement it.
mhm.
But we're happy to take a look at whatever you
Okay.
put together,
Okay.
as whatever comes out.
So, as far as providing us with some exemplars, could you do those,
Absolutely.
could you do that with, some rapidity, just because,
Of course.
if we look at it and say we want to, in 18 months, we want to, really be a much sounder organization,
Mhm.
that will give us some time
Yeah,
to,
when Mike and I go back, we'll take a look and we'll provide what we have to you, and we'll anonymize it, so
Yeah.
a lot of it times it comes from other municipalities.
well, that's okay.
Try to
You
Frankenstein
can,
that best
you can just
practices.
put the black tape on it, I'm all good with
So
that.
you can take the black
Yeah.
tape off.
Well, no, okay, you can redact it any way you like.
No, it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
Anybody else have more questions? I mean,
I
cer-
know we've,
yeah.
had an opportunity to meet with you guys as we've been bringing stuff together, as far as, town employment trees and things like that. And I know Tammy's been putting a lot of work into getting all the resources to you. And I also appreciate all the department heads who, took the
Yeah.
time to meet with you guys. And I appreciate you putting this together. And
Thank you.
I mean, sometimes having a consolidated document that has everyone we met with, that had just seen the entire
Mhm.
structure, that's a starting point.
Absolutely,
That's a
yeah.
good starting point to have and to understand where risks are. When we provide the document as to how we lay out the risks by department, that will be another piece of
Mhm.
the story that will help you.
And I think, as far as the select board and other boards in the community, we sort of, feel like we're, in the field, and there's a whole bunch of mines blowing up simultaneously, and we're just sort of running around, just hoping we can
Whack-a-mole.
whack-a-mole, keep people alive if we can. Really, and so and because of sometimes I feel so badly for the two people who are sort of trying to manage stuff. There's too few of them, and they don't have enough hours to do their jobs, and they're not alone. And so what we end up doing is sort of being a very reactive rather than a carefully planning, organization. And while I'll say we all take some responsibility for that, we all understand that this isn't a real job. It's a job to service the community, and sometimes I feel desperately sad that I'm failing so with rapidity, because I can't deliver what I know is the right thing to do. I don't have the authority to do that, and sometimes I feel, because I have another job, I don't have the time to do it. And I don't mean to speak for others on here, but There are definitely things that I know, I see, that are just red lights blinking at us. And we're just saying, okay, well, we'll try to do that one today, but, you know, the heating thing is down at the library, and they have this problem over here, and the senior center's blowing up because everybody wanted to go to a special dinner and they didn't get to go. And it goes, you know, just crazy stuff. So, anyhow, I think this is great. It gives me at least a little bit of an idea about, okay, maybe there's a way to plan and leave something behind when all of us decide, okay, we're not gonna do this anymore.
Right.
That there's like something
There's a
there that they
roadmap.
said, this is a roadmap. You've gotta ride on this road. And this is the community's, you know, policies and procedures. We have about 6 different, I think varieties of policies and procedures that sort of float around here that nobody spent a lot of time with, and I'm guessing some selectmen did. They put some time and effort into it, but that lack of continuity is making it very difficult to move the community forward. You know, I'm sure I don't intend to speak for anybody else, but that's my feeling. So I'm happy to have this opportunity to work with an outside agency that has taken a look, and with critical eye, not jaundiced eye, and that's a good thing.
It is, it is.
So, I believe the next part, there were some potentially specific things to do with town security that we were going to address in executive session. So,
Okay.
if
So
there's anything else.
We're prepared to do that at this point. Would you make the motion?
I would move to enter into executive session to discuss the deployment of security personnel or devices or strategies with respect thereto.
A second.
We have a motion made and seconded. Those in favor?
Dixon, yes?
Marshall, yes?
Again, yes.